Welcome to this YSL Report Builder tutorial. In this video we're going to use indicators to compare values on previous rows in a table. We'll start with a quick reminder of how to create a grouped table, and then show you how to compare the current row's value with the previous row's value using the previous function. We'll show you a quick way to check if a number is negative, positive or zero before we replace that value with an indicator to show it graphically. We'll also then explain how you can set the numeric bands for an indicator so that you can control exactly which icon appears for which value you've calculated. So let's get started. Here's a quick idea of the type of thing we'll aim to create. This table is showing a list of the average runtime in minutes for a table of films, and we've grouped the films based on which year they were released in. The third column is showing a comparison between the current year's average runtime and the previous year's average runtime, with a basic graphical indicator to show whether that was higher or lower or stayed the same. We're not going to focus too much on how the previous function works, just because we've covered that in detail in a couple of previous videos in this playlist, so I'll drop some links to part 9.9 and 9.10, which explains in quite a lot of detail how those functions work. If you want to follow along with this video, you'll just need a copy of the YSL Movies database, and this video explains how to get that set up. There's a link in that video's description you can use to download any files you'll need. Assuming you've done that part already, I'll head over to a blank report builder report and get started by creating the data source. To begin, I'll right-click on my Data Sources folder and choose Add Data Source. I'll call this one Movies, and then use an embedded connection pointing to a Microsoft SQL Server. I'll click the Build button to get some help with the connection string, and start by typing in a full stop and a backslash as a shortcut to my local host, and then SQL 2017, which is the name of the instance of SQL Server that I'm using. I can then select my Movies database from the drop-down list towards the bottom of the dialog box, click OK a couple of times, and that's the data source created. I can then right-click on that Movies data source and choose Add Dataset, and I'll call this one Films, and then use the query designer just to get some help with picking a couple of columns from my film table. So from the tables folder, I can expand the film table, choose the release date, and then choose the runtime minutes field. And finally, I'd like to add a basic filter to show only those films released since the 1st of January 2000. So I can click on the Add Filter button towards the bottom right-hand corner here, set the release date field, and then choose the operator, or set the operator to say is more than or equal to, and for the value, simply type in 1/1/2000. Having done that, I can click OK, click OK again, and that's my basic dataset created. I'd like to be able to group my films based on the year in which they were released, and to help with that I'd like an extra column in the dataset which contains just the release year rather than the full release date. We could have added a calculated column to the underlying SQL query, but for this example I'm going to right-click on the films dataset and choose Add Calculated Field. From there I can create a new column name, let's call this one Release Year. And then I can click the FX button to get some help with building my expression using the Expression Builder. I'll start by heading into the Common Functions category and then find the Date and Time category, and then find the function that calculates the year. It's got a really clever name, it's called Year. I can then double click on that function to insert it into the builder, and then head back up my list of categories to find my fields list, and then simply double click on the release date field to insert that as well. I can finish off by closing a set of round brackets, and that's the entire expression created. Having done that, I can click OK a couple of times, and there's my additional column that I can now use to perform some grouping in my table. Next, I'd like to add a table to display the results of the dataset. I'll start by getting rid of my page footer and also getting rid of this placeholder title text box. Then I can right-click into the report body and choose Insert Table. I'll start by assigning the release year field to the first column of the table, and then just to make sure that we can actually see something when we run the report, you'll often encounter this font rendering bug where when you've inserted something into a table it doesn't actually display any text. A quick way to solve that is to head back to the design view and then highlight all the cells in the table, switch away from the default font and then back to it, and that's usually sufficient to make that actually display some text. Of course, at the moment we're seeing lots of duplicate years, and that's because the table at the moment is displaying one row for each film in the dataset. I want to group this data based on the release year. So to do that I can go back to the design view, and there are several ways I can make this work. I'm going to right click on the details object in the row groups panel at the bottom of the screen. I can then choose group properties. I can change the name of the current group so it says release year. That's just for convenience. We don't really need to do that. And then I can click the add button to add a group expression to group on the release year. While I'm here, I'd also like to sort the groups in ascending order of release year. So heading back to the sorting page on this dialog box, I can click the add button and then choose to sort by release year as well. Once I've clicked OK, I can run the report, and that should give me one row for each year in the dataset and sorted in ascending order. So finally, I'd just like to display a basic aggregate next to each year, which will be the average runtime. So heading back to the design view, I can use the field selector in the second column to choose the runtime minutes field. That will automatically apply a sum. I can click on the word sum and then right click on that and choose summarize by AVG. And then when I have that cell selected, I'm just going to apply the number format to that to reduce the number of decimal places down to 2. And if I run the report at that stage, there we go, we've got our basic table set up. Now we can start working on comparing the value of the current row against the value of the previous row. And to begin with, all I'm going to do is create a calculation in the third column that will retrieve the value from the previous row of the table and display it side by side with the current year's value. To do that, I can head back to the design view and I can right click into the data cell in the third column of the table and choose expression. If you've watched the earlier videos that I mentioned on the previous function, you'll already know how to do this, but just in case, I'm going to show you in the common functions category, there is a miscellaneous category. And if I double click on the previous function, I can then write any other expression to get that value from the previous row in the table. So to do that, let's go to the aggregate category and insert the average function. And then I can go to my fields list and insert the runtime minutes field. I've opened up two sets of round brackets there, so I need to close the same number of round brackets as I have open. And once I've done that, the final expression should just look like so. If I click OK, I'll apply the same number formatting to that cell as well, so that we get just 2 decimal places. And if I run the report now, we'll see that we've retrieved the value from the previous row to show it side by side with the value for the current year. Now I'd like to modify this expression to subtract the value for the previous year from the value of the current year. To do that, I can head back to the design view and I can right click on the cell that we've just added this expression to and choose expression again. So at the beginning of this expression now, I just need to calculate the average runtime for the current year. And I can do that fairly easily just by copying and pasting the current average function that's inside the previous function, and then pasting that to the beginning of that line. I can then type in a minus symbol in between the two, and that will achieve the results I want. So when I click OK, and then run the report again, we're now displaying the difference between each year. We do have one small problem with the first row of the table. When there is no previous row to reference, we're basically subtracting 0 from the value of the current year, so we get the exact same value displayed, which isn't quite what I want. I'm going to write another expression that's going to check whether there is a previous row to use, and if not, I want the value of this cell to be nothing. So to do that, let's head back to the design view and we can right click on the same cell containing the expression and choose expression again. I'm just going to take this current expression down a couple of lines. That's probably the last thing we want to happen in the entire expression. And then after the equals operator, I'm going to begin by typing in an if function. The if function is spelt with 2 i's in Report Builder. If I go to the program flow category of common functions, you can see your if function is displayed there with 2 i's. I can double click on that to insert it if I didn't want to type it out myself. And then on the next line, I'm just going to type in a few space characters to indent this code 1 space. I'm going to use one of the inspection functions to check if the previous row is nothing. So I can double click on the isNothing function. And then I want to, once again, copy and paste my previous average fields runtime minutes.value expression into that line. And I need to make sure that I've closed an extra set of round brackets for the isNothing function. So currently, the entire expression should look like so. At the end of that line, I want to type in a comma. So that's the logical test part of my if function. If that condition is true, if there is no previous row to compare, then on the next line, I'd like to tell the function to return nothing. And I can do that just by typing in the word nothing, followed by a comma, and then the final line is going to tell us what to return if there is a previous row to compare with, and that's the original expression that we wrote. The final thing I need to do is just make sure I've closed the extra set of round brackets that were opened by the if function, and then the final expression should look like this. Okay, so quite a lot of effort just to get rid of that one single value from the table, but when I click OK and run the report, the result just looks that little bit cleaner. Okay, so we have the expression which is calculating the actual value of the difference between the two rows. What I'd like to do now is calculate a new value that our indicator can use to display whether the number was greater than, or less than, or the same. So we basically want to come out with 3 different possible values that our indicator can use. A really simple way to do that with this basic example here is to use a function called sign, which tells you whether a number is negative, positive, or 0 with 3 different values. So what I'm going to do is head back to the design view, and then I'm going to insert a new column into the table by right-clicking into the existing column and inserting a new one to the right. I can then add a new expression to this data cell, but before I do that, I want to find out what the name of this current cell is. If I select the text box in the table into which we've just inserted that slightly long expression, we can see that it's got a name. It's called textbox 24. You can see that at the top of the properties window. It's also a little further down the properties window, and if you'd like to give this a slightly more informative name than textbox 24, we could change the name of that text box here. Let's call this one difference from previous. It's a slightly long-winded name, but it's descriptive, and I'm going to use that in my next expression. So I'm just going to copy that name from the properties window there that I've just typed in. And then we can right-click into the new text box, choose expression, and the expression itself is pretty straightforward. I want to go to the common functions category, to the math category, and find the function called sign. I can double click on that to insert it. And then inside the sign function, I want to reference a text box in this report. Every object that sits on the report page belongs to a collection called the report items collection. You can't insert report items directly from the expression builder, but what you can do is type in the name report items, followed by an exclamation mark, followed by the name of the report item. So that's going to be the one that I've just copied and renamed in the properties window. So I can just paste that in, difference from previous, and then a full stop and the particular property of that object you want, which in this case is the value. I can then close the round brackets, and that's the entire expression written. And then I can click OK, run the report, and I should see that wherever the value compared with the previous year is a positive number, I get the number 1. When it's a negative number, I get the value -1. And when it's the same or 0, or there's nothing to display, I get the value 0 instead. Next, I'd like to convert this column of numbers into a set of graphical indicators. And to do that, I can head back to the design view, and I can simply right-click on the cell that we've added our sign expression to, choose Insert, and then choose Indicator. And from the dialog box which appears, I simply want to pick an indicator set which has 3 different icons. I'm going to go with the one that's called 3 up-down triangles, although I appreciate that the middle one there clearly is not a triangle. I'm going to go for it nonetheless. So that will give us 1 icon for each of the 3 different values in our column, -1, 0, and 1. I can then click OK. Now I need to make sure that the icon is going to display next to the specific number I'm interested in. So the negative numbers should display the downwards triangle, the zeros should display the yellow bar, and then the positive numbers, the +1s, should display the upwards triangle. So to change that, I'm going to right-click on the cell that's got the indicator in it and choose Indicator Properties. If I head onto the Value and States page, you can see that at the moment it's trying to calculate which indicator to use based on the percentage of the values in that column. I'm going to change this, so it's not using a percentage, it's going to use a numeric value. And then I can change the start and end of each band to say -1 for the downwards triangle, 0 for the yellow bar, and then +1 for the upwards triangle. At this point, if you don't like the set of indicators you've chosen, you're more than welcome to change those. You can choose any other icon from the set that was provided to you, so you can mix and match between different icon sets. And you can even pick some icons that weren't previously displayed, like the frowny face and the smiley face, if you really want to. I'm going to stick with the up and down arrows, but I'm going to change the colours of these to make them a little more stand out. So I'm going to change the sort of pale red colour to tomato, then the sort of murky yellow colour to, let's go with gold, and then the up arrow, let's go with a bright blue instead. So having done all of that, I can click OK, and now when I run the report, we should see that we've got our -1, 1 and 0 replaced with these graphical indicators instead. Just to add some finishing touches to this now, I'd like to change the formatting of these cells so that it looks like the value and the indicator belong to the same cell. So I'm going to get rid of the right-hand border from the value cell and then apply a bottom border and a right-hand border to the indicator cell. Back in the design view, I can select the cell containing the expression first, then I'll click the dialog box launcher for the border group on the home tab of the ribbon. It's just a fairly easy way to modify borders. It gives you a very clear view as to which borders you currently have applied and which ones you can deactivate. So I'll get rid of the right-hand border for that cell. I can then click OK and then select the cell containing the indicator and launch the same dialog box, and I'll apply a light grey bottom border and a right border by clicking the appropriate buttons. If I then click OK there, I'll just make these columns a little narrower so they look like they're the same cell rather than one really, really long cell. Then I'm just going to merge together the header cells of those two columns. So I've selected both cells, and there's a merge button on the home tab of the ribbon there that will merge those into one single cell. I can then create a title for this. Let's call this one Difference from Previous Year or something along those lines. And then maybe some background colours and font formatting for the header row just to make those stand out a little bit. I won't spend too long doing this. I'm sure you can come up with far better formatting than I do. But when I run the report now, we can hopefully see that looks a little bit cleaner. We could also apply some formatting to these numbers so that the colours match that of the indicators. To do that, let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to select the cell containing that expression and then head over to the properties window and find the font colour property, click on the drop down arrow next to the colour black and then choose expression. Here I've got 3 conditions to test. I want to check if the value of that cell is either greater than 0, less than 0 or equal to 0 and produce the correct colour font. To do that I could use nested if functions, but I think it's probably easier to use a function called switch, which provides you with an easy way to test multiple conditions. So I've taken away the colour black from the expression box. I'll head to the program flow category of common functions and then double click the switch function. I'll then hit enter and give myself a few blank spaces to indent my code. And then I've got a couple of options for what I could do next. I want to check the result of the expression that we entered into this text box, but I don't want to have to write out that enormous if function again. So a quick, simple way to reference the value of the cell that you're writing your expression in is to use the keyword me. So if I say me.value, that will give me the value of the cell that this expression belongs to. And I want to check if that is, let's go for less than 0 first of all, followed by a comma. And if that's true, I want to select the same colour as the downwards arrow. So I'm going to go to the constants category and then click on the tomato colour. I can then type in another comma, head down to the next line and say me.value greater than 0, followed by a comma, and then go for the same shade of blue that I used earlier. One more comma, and I could then say on the next line me.value equals 0, but as this is the only other possibility anyway, it's far simpler just to enter the value true. Whichever condition we test on this line will be true anyway. So if we said me.value equals 0, then it must be, because it's neither less than nor greater than 0 if we reach this point. So true is a nice little shortcut to get to the same answer. We can then select the colour we want, which was gold, close the round brackets, and the final expression should look like so. I'll click OK on that dialog box, and then one last thing I'm going to do while I'm here, in the Properties window, I'm going to scroll down to find the number format property. The property is currently set to N2, so that's a number with 2 decimal places, and it uses that format because that's what we selected from this drop-down list earlier on. I'm going to replace that with a new number format, which is going to be plus 0.00, so that controls how positive numbers appear, followed by a semicolon, and then negative 0.00. So that's a basic custom number format to show 2 decimal places with a plus symbol in front of positive numbers and a negative symbol in front of negative numbers. Once I've done that, we can run the report one more time, and the whole thing should just look a little more consistent. So there we go, that's the basics of using an indicator to compare values on previous rows. Hope you found that one useful. Thanks for watching, see you next time.